Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Good morning, Fresno. John Girardi here with you on Right to Life Radio, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California. RTLCC.org is the place to be. Joining me, he's back after a several-week hiatus. The one, the only, Mr. Jonathan Keller. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Good to be back, John. It really has been a while. I was listening to some of the past catalog, the backlog of episodes you've recorded in my absence, and I was thinking, man, it's been far too long.
It's been far too long. Well, we're glad to have you back. We're glad to have you back here on this lovely Easter week, or Holy Week. Thank you all so much for tuning in to listen to Right to Life Radio. And check out everything we're doing at Right to Life of Central California on our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and search for Right to Life of Central California. All right. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We got a big billboard on Blackstone and Shaw I want to get to later in the show. But today we're going to start with America's favorite curmudgeonly old socialist man, Mr. Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has spearheaded the Medicare for All. Gosh darn it, I said I said in the start of the show. I'm going to... Learning how to do radio well is basically just a long process of eliminating the word from your vocabulary. So I'm going to swear not to do it again for the rest of the show.
As our friends at the ADF comms department call it, the killer fillers.
It is the killer filler. Anyway, we are in the midst of Medicare for All mania in the House of Representatives. Bernie Sanders, this is his signature project, and a bunch of his Democratic colleagues who are running for president in 2020 are standing with him in endorsing Medicare for All. Elizabeth Warren, Kristen Gillibrand, Cory Booker, a bunch of others. But Bernie has been the chief pusher of Medicare for All for a good long while. So I want to talk about it a little bit. Now, as we've said before on the show with different things, like we've talked about Obamacare, we've talked about repealing Obamacare, we've talked about all these different things that have to do with healthcare. Right to Life of Central California doesn't take a position on questions like, should there be universal healthcare? Should the federal government pay for everyone's healthcare? We don't really take positions on that. We're not an organization that focuses on health insurance questions. It's not within our gambit, and there are very good pro-life people who are on both sides of the question of whether or not we should have a national, federally funded, universal coverage healthcare system. There's obviously a large spectrum of different positions you can take, and I've heard very reasonable people on both sides. On the one side, people who do the math and ask, how the heck are we going to pay for this without massive, massive tax increases? On the other side, people saying, well, yes, but maybe that's just the price we should pay for living in a civilized society where we should take care of absolutely everybody. Reasonable people on both sides. The one thing where we take a very, very strong position, though, is any healthcare proposal that is treating abortion as if it is normal healthcare. It is not normal healthcare. It is not healthcare, period. It is the opposite of healthcare. Healthcare helps preserve life, corrects problems, corrects illnesses and conditions. It does not kill. And the idea that our taxpayer dollars would be paying for healthcare, that the government would be funding healthcare, that our taxpayer dollars would be paying for abortion, that the government would be funding abortion, furnishing abortion, making abortion more accessible, that is wrong. And unfortunately, Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All proposal would not only fund abortion, it would literally pay for every single abortion in the United States up to birth.
And John, I know we argue about this a lot. Pro-life people are often upset about the complete sham, the gaslighting of the American public, saying that conservatives, that pro-lifers want to take away health care from millions of women. They want to attack, the reproductive health care of millions of women. No. Abortion has as much to do with reproductive health care as tattoos have to do with skin care.
Right.
It is a completely arbitrary and in about 99.9% of cases, wholly unnecessary.
Elective. Completely elective thing.
Service.
Yeah.
Yes. And it is not health care. Just because it is a surgical procedure performed on a person does not mean it is health care.
Right. If I ask you to amputate my foot
voluntarily, there's nothing wrong with it.
Now it depends. If I have gangrene in my foot and if you don't amputate the foot, I'm going to die. That is a healthcare procedure.
Correct.
Because you're preserving my health by cutting off my foot. If I just ask you to cut off my foot for no reason, that's not healthcare. That's mutilation. That's something grievously, horribly wrong.
And there's all sorts of things that are a little crazy. If you're on Facebook or Twitter or just the internet, sometimes you're scrolling through and you see people that are extremely they engage in what is called extreme body modification. Not just tattoos, but weird people that have like bifurcated tongues and they have like studs in their head and all sorts of massive piercings.
Yeah, my mom was really into that sort of thing back in the 60s.
Dr. Sharon Girardi, the dermatologist.
Yeah, she was big on back when she was at Woodstock and dropping acid. That real big. My mom is not into any of that stuff. Anyway,
well, but the idea is those are surgical procedures. Those are medical procedures that involve.
They're sort of medical adjacent.
Yes,
in a way.
They involve. I don't know. Some sort of many cases of surgical implements. They might involve anesthesia. They might involve different sorts of physical recovery, but they have as much right to be called healthcare as a voluntary elective abortion does.
Right.
And that's the thing that's insane to me, that you would say, because I have a pregnancy, I have a other human being that is growing inside of me, I'm going to demand, in this case, that healthcare, under the guise of healthcare, quote unquote, I am allowed to terminate the life of this separate human being.
Right. And usually not even for any kind of medical, in the vast, overwhelming majority of the cases, for reasons that have nothing to do with health. It's for reasons that have to do with, I'm not ready to have a baby, or finances, or career prospects, or educational prospects. Like it has nothing to do with anything actually tied to someone's health. So I want to read a little bit from this story, or a column written by Alexandra DeSanctis, our favorite writer at National Review.
Still got to get her on the show at some point.
We've had her on the show at one point.
That's one of the many shows I was gone.
No, you were there. The problem was, well, the first problem is your memory. The second problem is that this was in an earlier incarnation of the show when we had really bad production, and the whole radio station that we were on at that time completely shut down in the middle of our interview with her. And so now she probably thinks that we are complete morons. So I don't think she's going to come back on the show because of what a catastrophe that was. Anyway, we still love Alexandra, even if she thinks we're idiots. with good reason. So anyway, so her article is Medicare for All would mandate coverage for all abortions. By the way, that was before Power Talk 96.7. We have never had a problem with Power Talk 96.7, and we love the Power Talk people. So her article is called Medicare for All would mandate coverage for all abortions. Alexandra writes, we also love Alexandra because she's a fellow graduate of Notre Dame, blah, blah, blah. Late last month, House Democrats unveiled the text of their Medicare for All proposal, which, in addition to being grotesquely expensive and fiscally irresponsible, her words, would mandate government coverage of abortions. Individuals enrolled for benefits under this act, this is the text of the bill she's quoting here, individuals enrolled for benefits under this act are entitled to have payment made by the secretary to an eligible provider for comprehensive reproductive, maternity, and newborn care. The bill, sponsored by Representative Pramila Jayapal, states, in plain language, the bill would guarantee, quote, free abortions for all women, or at least as free as every other type of healthcare ostensibly would be under their implausible regime, which is to say abortion would be underwritten, along with everything else, by taxpayers. The legislation also would explicitly wipe away any law on the books that attempts to prevent federal healthcare spending from directly paying for abortion procedures. So basically, this would eliminate the Hyde Amendment, which is this rider that gets attached to the federal budget every year, which prevents federal taxpayer dollars from directly paying for abortion in federal healthcare programs like Medicaid. So, and she goes on to say that this would effectively nullify conscience protections, such as the Hyde Amendment and other riders like it, which have been added until very recently on a bipartisan basis to federal spending bills since the mid-1970s to protect taxpayers from being compelled to underwrite abortion procedures that are reimbursed by federal healthcare programs. So this is, I think, a point of real sadness. I mean, we've talked a lot on this show that this isn't a Republican show. This isn't a Democrat show. Right to Life's not a Republican or a Democrat organization. We're a 501c3. We don't endorse parties. We endorse principles. That sounds like a real slogan. We don't actually have the slogan of we endorse principles, not parties. Anyway, however, we have bemoaned the fact that abortion has become a very political and partisan issue, that the Republicans are, for the most part, pro-life, and the Democrats are, for the most part, pro-choice. We wish it weren't so divided. I think, and we'll get to this a little more after the break, but I think the thing that makes me saddest about all this is that I wish that we could have a more genuine debate on questions relating to healthcare and health insurance coverage for everybody. But for you pro-choicers out there, if you want to achieve the goal of providing everyone with healthcare coverage, maybe starting with funding every single abortion in the country, maybe that's why it's a non-starter for all of your conservative friends out there. And maybe you could get a few more of us to listen to some of your ideas if you didn't lead off with, hey, let's force everyone in America to pay for literally every single abortion. We'll be back with more on this topic right here on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. The best music in the greater Fresno area radio market and perhaps the entire world. Sing it, Tammy. And here we go. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Right to Life Radio. Always a delight. It's Marvin Gaye week this week here on Right to Life Radio. Oh. So there you go. This is going to be early Marvin Gaye week, not late Marvin Gaye week. Late Marvin Gaye week would be like, what's going on and things like that. No, this is early Marvin Gaye, back when he was still in Motown and Berry Gordy was probably paying him a nickel per song. Anyway, Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Jonathan's really into the show right now. I could literally say anything.
You could say anything.
I could literally say anything.
Continue.
Anyway.
I like Marvin Gaye too. It's just,
As we've been talking about on the show, we've been talking about Bernie Sanders and his Medicare for All proposal. And there is a bigger healthcare debate that can be had regarding should the government provide healthcare coverage for everybody? Should it not provide healthcare coverage for everybody? How would we pay for that? What would our tax rates have to be? Is this something that society owes to its poorest members, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? These are big, broad societal discussions, and people of goodwill, I believe, can be on both sides of those issues without necessarily being completely evil. And it's not a question that Right to Life Central California takes a position on, but the one thing we take a position on is that the federal government shouldn't be paying for abortion.
And John,
taxpayer dollars shouldn't be paying for abortion, and abortion is not health care.
And I want to point out something that's interesting on that note. A lot of times you hear people like Bernie Sanders and other people saying in his caucus saying, well, you just, I don't understand why it's such a big deal about socialism, all these concerns. Look at these European countries. The Scandinavian countries. Mm-hmm. Look at
Scandinavia.
It's
always the model that's held up.
They've got universal health care. And why don't we just go follow their lead? They are not Cuba. They're not Venezuela. They're not Soviet Russia. They're fine. And my response is, okay, I'm open to looking at that. Maybe there are, as you said, some democratic things we could do that would allow us to examine if a universal healthcare system would work here. How do you feel about adopting those nations' policies on abortion? Because those nations have dramatically more restrictive laws on when abortion can happen. In the United States, it's essentially up till the day of birth.
Right.
In Denmark and Sweden and other places, it is much, much earlier than that. In France, I think it is 12 to 14 weeks.
France, I believe it's first trimester pretty much. And you need to have like counseling or something beforehand. Like it's actually very restrictive.
And suddenly they get very quiet when you ask them, okay, why is it that those places, they have restrictions on abortion and they don't want to pay for abortion, especially late-term abortion, using government dollars, and yet suddenly people get very quiet when you ask about the difference between that.
Yeah, exactly. That is a very good point. Point to Jonathan Keller on that side of the debate. But this is a really huge issue that's going to continue to be a major theme in the 2020 presidential debates. And really, this is a broader question. The Hyde Amendment, which we talked about a bit in the first segment. The Hyde Amendment is this rider that gets attached to the federal budget every single year and has been since the mid-'70s. And basically what it does is it prevents federal taxpayer dollars from directly funding abortion through federal healthcare programs like Medicaid, for example, Medicaid being the chief one. That has been in place since the mid-'70s, and it has probably saved literally millions of unborn children's lives. Literally millions. And this is based on estimates done by different researchers.
And you mean literal in the literal sense of the word, not in the Joe Biden sense of the word.
1,000 thousands equals a million. That's what I mean. Now, for a long time, support for the Hyde Amendment was on a bipartisan basis. You had Republicans and Democrats endorsing it. And this was a kind of consensus that was most well expressed among Democrats with the 1990s phrase of Bill Clinton that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Safe, legal, and rare. They are okay with abortion being legal. They are okay with abortion being safe because, whatever, as if it's, which let's ignore all of the actual safety problems with legal abortion. But they thought abortion should be rare, that it shouldn't be needed. And so, as a result, they were saying by having the federal government pay for it, you make it more common and more accessible. So we're not going to have the federal government pay for it. We recognize that many of our constituents aren't comfortable having their taxpayer dollars pay for it, even if they might be okay with it just being legal. So many, many, many Democrats supported the Hyde Amendment every year. Well, that number grew less and less and less over time. We're now at the point where the bipartisan Congressional Pro-Life Caucus is only able to call itself bipartisan because I believe there is one member of it who is a Democrat, Dan Lipinski from Illinois.
Who, interestingly, trivia note, Alexandra DeSantis, putting her money where her mouth was, walked precincts for him.
She did.
Because it should be a bipartisan issue. Just a quick aside, John.
It should be.
A lot of times, I don't know if you get this, but a lot of times our liberal friends say, well, you pro-lifers, you don't really care about babies. This is just a clever ruse to try to dupe Christians, Catholics, and other pro-life people into voting Republican.
Yeah, which if that were the case, honestly, why would... Listen, if the Republicans put forward a pro-choice presidential candidate, I would say to hell with them and I'd be done. The idea that I am in this, not just talking about personal political preferences here. The only reason I have any sort of affiliation with Republicans whatsoever, I myself, is because of the abortion issue.
Yep.
I am as much of a single issue voter as you possibly can be. I care about other things. I think other issues are important. I am concerned about things like all kinds of things. I care about issues like immigration, and I care about things like taxes, and I care about I care about the economy. Nothing compares to the fact that 1 million children are murdered every year. Nothing. Nothing comes to that level of importance for me. So for me personally, I'm not talking about Right to Life Central California. For me personally, as long as there is one legitimate horse in the race that's going to at least do something to stop that, I mean, I'm not sure what else I can do. All right. So this is just me talking. This is not Right to Life of Central California talking. Okay. And the idea that this is just a cynical plot by pro-lifers, that pro-lifers don't actually care about ending abortion. What they really just care about is, I don't know, tax breaks for billionaires or something when I'm not even a billionaire, or that it's just my way of expressing antipathy for Mexicans or something. Like, no, I genuinely care about abortion. I genuinely care about millions of people being murdered, and I think there are millions of voters just like me. Anyway, I've gone totally off the rails here. But the point I want to make is that over the years, support for the Hyde Amendment among Democrats has dwindled and dwindled to the point where in 2016, for the first time ever, the Democrats included in their party platform, the official statement of what the Democratic Party believes, they stated that they want to repeal the Hyde Amendment, that they as a party oppose the Hyde Amendment. Now, with Medicare for All, most of the Democratic presidential frontrunners, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, whatever.
Yep.
All of them support Medicare for All, which includes universal funding for abortion, for every single abortion. And those policies are something that are going to be huge issues in the 2020 presidential election and are huge points for us as pro-lifers to oppose. Because, again, it's not about safe, legal, and rare anymore. The modern pro-choice line is safe, legal, and accessible. And the easiest way to make abortion universally accessible to every woman in America is to use your taxpayer dollars to pay for it. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about a very interesting billboard at Sean Blackstone about in vitro fertilization. We'll be right back on Right to Life Radio with John Girardi. This is Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell here on Right to Life Radio. There is nothing like the real thing.
John, I hope they're singing about a husband and wife. That's all I have to say.
Echoing, Jonathan here is referencing my daughter, Miss Madeline Girardi. My wife was playing for her the song Boogie Shoes by Casey and the Sunshine Band, which goes, I want to get on my boogie shoes. And it's a very mediocre song, I think. But at any rate, Maddie asked my wife, Holly, Mama, what are boogie shoes? And Holly said, no, Maddie, those are shoes for dancing. And Maddie said, well, I hope it is a husband and a wife dancing, which Maddie is 4. I don't know how she's already developed some very strong opinions about the appropriateness of non-marital dancing. So
sounds like you need to get her to a nunnery.
Yeah, I think she's well on her way, apparently, with statements like that. Right to Life Radio with John Girardi. Thank you all so much for tuning in here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Speaking of Power Talk, so the studios for Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400 are very close to Sean Blackstone, and I want to talk about something that is right at Sean Blackstone. There's a billboard that you can see if you're heading west on if you're just a little bit east of Blackstone. You're heading west on Shaw. Right before you get to Blackstone, there's a billboard right there for an in vitro fertilization clinic. I don't want to give the name of the clinic out. 1, because I don't remember. 2, because I don't want to advertise for them or anything, and I don't want to. I don't want like pro-lifers to be like picketing and storming the gates outside of them or anything. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. Anyway, don't storm the gates. Don't do anything violent. Don't do anything illegal, etc.
Express your strongly worded displeasure on Facebook.
You can pick it if you want. Hey, that'd be fine. That'd be fine with me.
Freedom.
Hey, First Amendment, baby. It's an in vitro fertilization clinic, and it's really broadly advertised. And I'm glad Jonathan's here because I know he and I both feel very strongly on this topic, and I think it's something about the topic of infertility care and what the state of American infertility care is, and we're going to do a plug for one of our favorite people in the universe, Dr. Amy Holmes. So Many of our listeners probably know this. In vitro fertilization is a delicate subject to talk about, even for a pro-life organization, because I think a lot of people don't understand the reasons why so many pro-lifers have objections to in vitro fertilization. And there are a number of reasons why. I think there are strong arguments to be made that in vitro fertilization, even if it did not result in the creation and destruction, the irresponsible creation and usually destruction of new fetuses, new embryos, that it would still be wrong, even if it was only the creation of one embryo and inserting one embryo and there was no additional loss of life. I think that there is a certain argument from human nature. There's a certain argument that children are to be viewed as a gift, not as
commodities.
A commodity to be technocratically created and inserted based on your desire to have a child. The point of a human being is not for you as an individual or as a couple to fulfill your desire to be a mom. The child has value in and of him and herself, and if that child comes about naturally, then that is a gift and a blessing, or at least just a gift. Maybe you don't even need to use religious language. I've heard really great arguments from completely secular philosophical and ethical arguments against in vitro fertilization that don't have to rely on anything religious. However, I think a simpler argument about in vitro fertilization to make to pro-lifers, and I don't want anyone who's listening to this, if you have undergone in vitro fertilization to have a child, if someone you know underwent in vitro fertilization to have a child and didn't understand that these things were happening or didn't realize that there's potentially something immoral about this, I'm not saying this to condemn you. I'm not condemning anybody. I'm not saying that your child should not have been brought into existence or denying their humanity and value. I mean, God knows I know of people who were conceived out of wedlock. I oppose sex before marriage. That doesn't mean that I think people who are conceived out of wedlock are lesser thans and should be despised and that they don't have human value and dignity. Lots of people come into existence through less than ideal circumstances. I'm sure I have a great grandpa or somewhere or other down the line who maybe was conceived 5 months before his parents got married. This is not to deny the humanity and value of children who are conceived via in vitro fertilization. This is simply an argument of describing what in vitro fertilization does and why it's not great. So the practice of in vitro fertilization, it basically involves getting sperm cells from the dad, artificially giving the woman hormones so that she can super ovulate and produce more egg cells, mixing them together in a petri dish, and this results in the creation of multiple new embryos. Most of these embryos will not survive. Or if they do survive, they wind up getting frozen or something, which is a whole humongous mess of ethical problems that now you have these human beings frozen in stasis, and what are you going to do with them?
Not potential human beings, not
actual living human beings with their own fully unique set of DNA. Who
and John, I've heard some people say, as an example, in other cases, there's a difference. I think if you have I have friends that have gone through cancer treatment, and they were a younger couple. They'd only been married for a short period of time, and the husband was diagnosed with cancer. He was undergoing radiation and chemo, and they were not sure if after those treatments he would be fertile any longer. Right. So they harvested some of his sperm, and they froze some of his sperm because they said, we would like to have kids in the future. Sure. And there are, not to get too graphic on a family show, but there are non-in vitro ways of fertilizing the woman using that sperm. Yeah. We're not talking, though, about a woman's eggs being frozen or a man's sperm being frozen. We're talking about, in this case,
human beings
that are already created, that if given just the environment and nutrition,
the normal natural environment,
if they were inside the womb, left 9 months, they would be born.
Right.
But instead of being inside the womb, they are inside. In vitro means in glass.
In glass, yeah, in a test tube. Yeah.
They are in glass and they are on ice.
Right. And so there's there are enormous moral problems with that. Often, well, not often, but it's becoming more and more common, certainly among certain celebrities. In addition to in vitro fertilization, you also have the very bizarre and heartbreaking sometimes and really problematic issues of surrogacy parents. This is becoming much more common now that gay marriage is more of a thing. Pete Buttigieg and his husband, Pete Buttigieg is running for president, he's the mayor of South Bend, they declared that they're planning to have a child soon, which clearly won't be they having a child. It'll be one of their sperm cells and an egg cell from some woman, and it'll be in the body of a surrogate parent somewhere. And there are all kinds of problems of, okay, well, this woman has born this child in her womb for 9 months, and now she wants to keep the child. What are we going to do? We're forcibly going to take this child away? What if the surrogate mom is also the biological mom? You're now literally asking women to sell their bodies for profit to be a surrogate parent. There's all kinds of public problems, public policy problems with that women are being taken advantage of. Women in desperate situations are called to do this. There's so many problems with surrogacy as part of in vitro. And furthermore, I feel there's something really disgusting about, now I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe I am. Kim Kardashian, I think for her 2 most recent children, had a surrogate parent. I may be totally wrong about that. But there is more and more of this celebrity culture of in vitro fertilization, using a surrogate mother to give birth because, I don't want to hurt my body or something. Like, that's really, really gross. There's also a gross kind of sex-selective grossness about in vitro fertilization. Not to bring it back to Kim Kardashian. This I'm more sure of. I wasn't 100% sure about the surrogacy thing. I know that Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, their first child was a girl, and they decided we're going to do in vitro fertilization because we want to have a boy. So basically, weed out any embryos that were females and only only retain embryos that were male, because, quote, Kanye wants to have an heir. Not understanding that girls can inherit stuff. I mean, that's a pretty well-established principle of American law at this point, that we're not really making, Kanye's not actually the king of a small country that has, primogeniture through the male line. So
I didn't realize that Kanye was so transphobic. I mean, I can't believe he assumed the gender of this unborn child.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Well, and that only male children can be heirs. I mean there's a lot of, pride, we're not exactly in the days of Pride and Prejudice anymore. Girls can inherit stuff.
Get woke, really. Bro. Come on.
Exactly. So, anyway, just a normal, loving family, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West. So, when we come back, we're going to talk about a few more issues about in vitro fertilization, how I think it adversely affects infertility health care, and basically it's going to be an extended plug for our beloved board member, Dr. Amy Holmes, and the wonderful infertility treatments that she offers through her clinic. You're not going to want to miss it. This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi and Jonathan Keller. Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Well, the crack research team here at Right to Life Radio did research on what we were saying in the last segment, that Kim Kardashian and Kanye West used a surrogate for some of their kids. We have confirmed that was actually true.
That's right.
This show is very well researched, and by well researched, I mean I'm just shooting from the hip 99% of the time.
I'm just impressed that you knew so much about America's first family of pop culture, the Kardashian West.
The word surrogate sort of jumped out at me like kind of suddenly.
It's a big flashing beacon.
There's really not very much I know about them other than that they had a surrogate. So it is confirmed that their third child, and they are expecting their fourth child, who is currently being carried by a surrogate. Their third child was also carried by a surrogate. So another great example of, if there's any argument against in vitro fertilization that you need. It's that Kim Kardashian and Kanye West think it's a good idea. So what more infallible argument could I present other than that? Right to Life Radio with John Girardi here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Okay, so as we've said before in this first segment, we're talking about in vitro fertilization. We're talking about the serious pro-life problems with in vitro fertilization. This is not me condemning anyone in the audience who may have had a child via in vitro fertilization without realizing the ethical problems associated with it. If you didn't understand the ethical problems, then I'm not condemning you. You acted in you may not have known that it was wrong, and I'm not condemning you. I'm not saying you're going to hell. I'm also not saying that any child conceived through in vitro fertilization lacks human dignity or value. In fact, my argument for why in vitro is wrong is because the children produced by in vitro have dignity and value, and they should not just be treated as commodities in this way. And frankly, there are lots more children produced via in vitro who do not survive, who are produced and wind up being killed for every one child who actually is successfully born.
And this is something, John, where you have to ask, again, I mean, there's so many thorny ethical issues, but even if you thought the fact that in vitro fertilization was a neutral act by itself, if you didn't have moral problems with it, the fact that you were creating, as you said, multiple embryos, and it's kind of the Russian roulette of, well, we'll just see.
One of these might live.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just hugely problematic. And this was sparked by, there's a big billboard at Sean Blackstone for an in vitro fertilization clinic. Now, Jonathan and I have both, in our families, have experienced certain difficulties with infertility. My family far less than Jonathan. But both of us sought out the assistance, both of our families sought out the assistance of NAPRO doctors, NAPRO surgical practitioners.
NAPRO standing for Natural Procreative Technologies.
Right, which is this series of infertility health treatments that were developed out of Creighton University Medical School. And one of the big problems with in vitro fertilization is that it's a huge cash cow. And what it's done to infertility care in this country is basically, if you and your wife are experiencing fertility problems, basically there are a few initial things you can do. Okay, take this to maybe try to increase your sperm count. Take this to maybe do that. And then immediately the docs say, all right, well, let's try in vitro. And there's basically, you're jumping to this extreme, and there's no sort of intermediate middle ground of treatment that's being offered to help correct underlying fertility problems that are probably the cause. Basically, these underlying hormonal health problems that could very well be the cause of infertility. Things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis. There are lots of different hormonal health problems that women can experience that could be at the root of infertility. So both my wife and Jonathan's wife had procedures done to sort of correct some of these problems. And for my wife, I know she was basically not releasing eggs. So if you're not releasing eggs, you can't have a baby. And basically we were thinking, well, unless something happens, we are never going to have a baby. And 6 months or so after this procedure, we got pregnant with our first child. Jonathan and his wife, Julia, had a very similar experience. And I guess you could talk about it a little more, Jonathan, but I mean, we were fortunate. We identified this very early on in our marriage, but I know you guys,
we were less fortunate.
Yeah.
we Hudson was born shortly after our 10th anniversary. So we had 2 miscarriages early on, and then we had almost 7 consecutive years between our last miscarriage and when Hudson was finally born. But yes, I will say, obviously, I wish, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I wish we would have known earlier, but we're also very grateful and excited to have Hudson now.
See, and that's the thing that angers me about what in vitro fertilization has done to infertility care in this country, is that here was this intermediate middle ground of treatment options that could have been available to you guys, but because in vitro is such a cash cow, and because the NAPRO technologies that Creighton was developed were wrongly slandered as being, oh, it's just this weird Catholic thing. Oh, just for people who you have little moral hangups about in vitro. When really, like, these are effective and these are and far cheaper than in vitro. And look at the results. I mean, there are all kinds of people who've benefited so tremendously. So, for any of you in Fresno, I want to promote our friend Dr. Amy Holmes, her clinic, which provides these treatments. She helped Jonathan and Julia. She can help you. Her clinic is called Advanced Procreative Gynecologic and Reproductive Specialists, but just search for Dr. Amy Holmes. The address for her clinic is 275 West Herndon Avenue, Clovis, California, 93612. And you can give her office a call at their phone number, 559-324-3833. Dr. Holmes is an OBGYN and infertility specialist. She's a NAPRO surgeon.
Can't recommend her highly enough.
She only does gynecology and infertility. She's not delivering babies anymore because she's got 5 or 6 kids of her own. So she's also a board member here at Right to Life, and she's going to be the medical director for our Obria clinic once we're established. So I can't recommend her anymore. In vitro is not the answer. Genuine pro-life healthcare that respects mom, respects children is the way to go. All right. With that, folks, we're going to have Old Blue Eyes, Mr. Frank Sinatra, play us out. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Right to Life Radio this week. Thank you, Jonathan, for showing up.
Happy to be here.
All right. We will see you all next week. Have a happy Easter, everyone.